Thank you, Arturo. As you heard in the introduction, there's an expression, we all heard it when we were growing up. So I'm going to say the first part again, just to remind us, and I want you to once again complete the phrase. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And thank you, Arturo. We've all heard that as we heard in the introduction. But guess what? We grow up and we go to the workplace and we find out right away that there are lots of occasions to say something not so nice. I suspect that on every day of the week we have an occasion where we need to give some negative feedback, share some concerns, let our coworkers know that what they're doing is not working. And how do we do that in a positive way? So after many years of kind of thinking about that, working in the university arena, seeing a lot of this going on, it occurred to me that really we've got to figure out some way to say something productively. I grew up as an Army brat. Any fellow military brats in the house? Let's see if there's a few of you. Any military in the house or been in the military previous? Hands up. Okay, let's give them a round of applause. So my dad was in the Army for 26 years, and we moved every 2 to 3 years, just like clockwork. And what was interesting to me is that sometimes when we would leave, we would have to leave friends. And we would be sad, and we'd say, bye. And then there'd be those other people we would leave, and we'd be like, bye-bye. Because we were all too happy to go and be rid of them. And wouldn't you know, we'd get over here to the new place, and there they would be. Okay, well, maybe it really wasn't them, but it was certainly someone who seemed suspiciously like them. And it occurred to me at a very early age that when it comes to conflict, negativity, people that we disagree with, you can run, but you can't hide. At some point, we've got to figure out how do we productively address these situations, because it's the fact of life. It's not going to ever change. Now, I grew up as the oldest of 4 children. I have 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. Do I have any fellow kindred spirits, eldest children in the house? Wave at me, let's see where you are. Okay, I want to talk about that for just a moment, because I spent much of my childhood with my 2 younger sisters and younger brother, reminding me every day of the week, as you see on the screen, you're not the boss of me. Because I was the bossy big sister. But you know what happened is when I went to the workplace, I discovered as a university administrator, which was my previous career, I did supervise some people. I was the boss of some people, but I could still see some of them looking at me. They wouldn't say it out loud, but I could see the nonverbal, and in their eyes, I could see it. You're not the boss of me. And I think some of you know people like that. You might be their supervisor, but they might still be looking at you like, who do you think you are? And so I had to kind of learn how to communicate in a way that didn't invoke the you're not the boss of me reaction. I think most of us on a typical day, and I want to get a show of hands on this as well, how many of you find that you need to get the collaboration and support of people and you're not the boss of them? You need support from people and you're not the boss of them. Yes, I love that one woman in one of my presentations put it so perfectly. She says, you know what, Sarita, I want to know, how do you pull rank when you have no rank to pull? Because isn't that our plight on a typical day? We're having to boss people around and we're not even their boss. And I learned early on that I could make a slight shift in the way that I presented myself. As a bossy big sister, my inclination was some of those phrases you see on the screen. And by the way, I should point out that all the slides are also in your agenda packet. So for those of you who are note takers, you do have all the slides in your packet on the table. But as you'll see on the screen, some of my favorite big sister phrases weren't going to work in the workplace. Like, you better, you need to, you should, you know what you ought to do. And you know when you do that, that invokes that defensive reaction, and people are saying, no, I don't. Or better yet, they're saying, whatever. So my quest was, how do I communicate in a way that doesn't invoke the bossy big sister reaction, the you're not the boss of me? And so we're going to talk a little bit about some communication strategies that we can use when we need to communicate with others, even when we're not their boss. In fact, I'm going to share my favorite top 10 positive communication phrases, and you'll notice that many of them do not include the you better, the you should, you need to phrasing. I find that the reaction we get sometimes when we use those phrases is much like I call it the teenager reaction. And I'm curious, how many of you, like me, have survived teenagers, or you're in the throes of it right now? Let's see, hands up. Okay. Yes, I survived, lived to tell about it. My daughter is 26, almost 27, grown and gone. But I do remember as a teenager some angst. By the way, some of you did not raise your hands. How many of you at least would recognize a teenager if you saw one around the corner, down the street? Okay, let me take one more survey. How many of you work with people who act like teenagers? And what I mean by that is the people who say, whatever. And I think, again, as I've implied already, as I've actually said, we have certain things that we do that invoke the whatever reaction. And so our quest, again, is to avoid doing that if possible. I feel like this is a mantra, and I've tweeted this. I do, by the way, encourage you, if you're tweeters, if you love to tweet pictures, feel free to take pictures of anything on the screen. @Sarita Maybin is my Twitter handle. But this is one of my favorites, which is, say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. And some people tend to think that we either have to say nothing at all or we have to be ugly. And I think there's a lot of territory in between those where we can say something that's positive, productive, and direct without being ugly. So say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. So I feel like that's a backdrop for a lot of what we're going to talk about during our brief time together today. I'm a fan of John Maxwell, leadership guru, and some of you may be familiar with John Maxwell. I go to a conference annually where I have a chance to see him in person and learn from him, spend a full day with him. And what's interesting is one of his quotes I think is so true. He says, really, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you all are subject matter experts in whatever your expertise is, but you probably know that your customers could care less. They may want to know some things that are important to them, but really they want to know, do you care? Are you going to address my concerns? Are you going to be able to resolve the problems that I have? And so I love this as well as a backdrop, which works for younger sisters and brothers and also works at work. So here's the million-dollar question. When something comes up, we often deliberate and we have this conversation with ourselves. Should I say something? I don't know if I should say something. Maybe I shouldn't say something. Maybe somebody else will resolve it. Maybe it'll resolve itself. Maybe, we just kind of ruminate, hand-wring, and debate, deliberate. And so I'm going to give you a rare opportunity to do something you don't often get asked to do. I'm going to ask you to do a little whining. How often do you get permission to whine? Or let's call it venting on a more positive note. We'll call it venting. And so I'd like you to choose what my 26-year-old daughter refers to as your BFF, which is your best friend forever. Or as one person said to me, Sarita, that feels like best friend forever. This person next to me is not my BFF. They're more like my BFFN. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And they said, my best friend for now. So please choose carefully. I'm going to give you several opportunities during our brief hour to chat with that person. So choose carefully your best friend for now, to your left or to your right. And I'd like you to do a little whining about something that's going on right now that you are debating. Do I confront it? Do I let it go? Do I confront? Do I not? So, and by the way, it could be at home as well. If you don't have anything at work, go home. I'll give you a few moments. So you've been venting. To confront, not to confront. To confront, not to confront. I feel like conflict is much like my least favorite household task, dishwashing. Now, it's not a big deal. Really, it's just a matter of taking the dishes out, the clean ones, and putting the dirty ones in. But sometimes I don't feel like doing that, and I'll say, I'll do it tomorrow, and I just leave the dishes sitting in the sink. Next day I come back, oh, dishes are still here. Like somehow the dishwashing elves haven't magically washed the dishes, but I'll do it tomorrow. I come back, I'll deal with it tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow, the dishes are still here. And now they're grungier. And I feel like conflict is like that. We kind of say, oh, maybe it'll resolve itself magically. Maybe somehow it'll all work out. And then we come back and it's just grungier. And it gets worse and worse and really doesn't go away. And I always think a good litmus test to ask ourselves, to use as a checklist to ask ourselves, should I confront or should I not, is the 3 questions you'll see on the screen and also on your handout as well. And those are a good test. And the first question is what they're doing having a negative effect? It's slowing down the work, causing you to miss deadlines, causing negativity on your team. Now, I have to confess that I have ego issues. Because sometimes the reason I want to confront is not because it's having a negative effect. The reason I want to confront is because they're not doing it the way I told them to do it. If they would just do what I told them to do, let me show them the error of their ways. That's the ego talking. So we kick that aside and instead ask the question, what is the effect of their behavior? How is it negatively impacting something? In myself, the team, the group, the family. The second question you'll notice is it starting to affect my attitude? Sometimes we end up getting resentful, and I know that there's people, you could name names even at this hour, of people who when they walk in your office, it feels kind of like dun-dun, dun-dun, dun-dun. And you're looking for the lever that you're able to pull for the trap door to open. Okay, I can fantasize. But I know you can all name names of people who they just kind of get you in a bad mood. You're just like, oh. I had a woman come to me and ask me an interesting question. She had an interesting comment she wanted my input on. And I will be around afterwards during the book signing. I'll also be available to answer any one-on-one questions. And normally when people ask me questions, I try to gather myself and compose myself so that I can have a profound response, an intelligent answer, an insightful comment. Well, this woman came at me with this comment, and before I could even collect myself, I said something really foolish. She came to me, she goes, Sarita, I think my coworker is laying awake at night plotting my demise. And when she said that, before I could even censor myself, I said, no, she's not. You're laying awake at night. She's sleeping soundly. And I thought, isn't it interesting that the people who are the problem have no idea that they are the problem? And when we talk about our phrases, we're going to talk a little bit about giving the benefit of the doubt. Can we kind of maybe assume that they didn't know? And so certainly we might have to check our attitude, and we might want to confront and let them know, because we're getting ugly and they don't even know that there's a problem. We're laying awake at night and they're sleeping soundly. And then of course the last question to ask ourselves is, what are the consequences of not confronting? A consulting firm did a survey and they asked people from all different industries, what's your #1 complaint about where you work? It's an interesting answer. I'll paraphrase loosely, but the answer was basically, people are getting away with stuff and nobody's doing anything about it. That was the #1 complaint. And sometimes if we don't handle things, the negative consequences, good people go away. Good people leave because no one is doing anything about the problems. And it's not that it's bad people, but there might be bad behavior that's not being addressed. So as you were talking, venting, whining, whatever you want to call it, discussing, whatever your concerns are, it's kind of good to run it through this little litmus test and check the ego at the door and say, okay, it's not about are they doing it my way or not, but it's about the negative effect they're having. It's about the attitude. Everybody's attitude's getting a little ugly. And then certainly, maybe there's some negative consequences. So as you ponder that, I'm going to give you a 3-step process that you can use. And I'm going to suggest this as a way of, first of all, letting the person know there's a problem. Remember awareness? Do they even know? I really think a lot of times we just assume that they're doing it to make our lives miserable. And there may be some of those people, but most people are not spending their time thinking about how to make your life miserable. They're just doing what they do. And in the process, they're pushing our buttons. So awareness is the first step, to make them aware. Secondly, what is the impact? And any of you who are note takers, I'd love you to write next to the I, so what? Because sometimes when I'm wringing my hands and I'm thinking, should I confront, should I not, should I say something? What snaps me out of that hand wringing is reminding myself, why do I care? So what? Well, I care because of the negative impact. I care because it's causing some problems. And that kind of causes me to realize that's what I need to focus on when I share my concerns. But you know where we fall down? We forget the R, to make a request. What do we really want them to do differently? I asked that question of a group of supervisors I was talking with at a company training I was doing, and one man raised his hand and he says, Sarita, in my heart of hearts, what I really want is for them to never show up at work ever again. So I'm going to ask you to find your new best friend for now, and I'd like you to continue your conversation about the situation you were discussing a few moments ago. And I'd like you to answer the question, short of them never coming to your office again, short of that, what do you want in your heart of hearts? What do you want to happen differently in that situation? So I'll give you a few moments to talk about in your heart of hearts. Well, not to worry. You will have an opportunity to continue your discussion. I'm just going to give you a few more tools to throw in the mix, so you'll have a chance to continue your discussion in just a few moments. I want to give you my favorite top 10 positive communication phrases, and you'll notice as you look at the phrases that some of them kind of plug right into the AIR. And by the way, this AIR acronym is an acronym I made up probably about, 10 years ago when I kept talking about awareness and talking about what's the impact and talking about what do you really want. And somewhere along the way discovered that that was a cool acronym, AIR. I actually have a whole chapter in my book just about AIR, about AIR. So this is really a good kind of template that you can use as you address situations. But I do want to plug in a few additional tools, some phrases that you can actually use. And you'll notice phrase 10 and 9 really plug right into that A, which is the awareness. And you'll notice the you word, but it's not a you word in terms of dictating you better, you need to. It's perhaps you didn't realize, perhaps you were not aware, again, giving the benefit of the doubt. So phrase 10 and 9, I want to point out those because those are phrases people are intimidated by. I'm going to ask you to pick your favorite phrases in a few moments. People never pick 10 and 9 because they're like, ooh, those look scary. They have the you word. But it's really about pointing out things that people may not realize. And sometimes as colleagues, we need to pull each other's coattails and let them know what we're seeing. I remember when I was working in the university, I had a coworker who was kind of had issues with our boss. And so whenever he'd come around, she would just go, it was ever so subtle, but it was like, I said, do you realize you're doing this thing when the boss comes? She goes, what thing? I'm not doing anything. I'm like, yeah, you're doing this thing. I'm not doing anything. What thing? I mean, I actually had to demonstrate the thing she was doing, and I said, I'm worried that that'll get you in trouble because it's subtle, it's nonverbal, but it's negative. And sometimes we have to, I call it pointing out the proverbial spinach in the teeth. In fact, I remember when my daughter was younger, and I would say fly home like I'm flying back to San Diego, California tonight when I leave here. My daughter's out of the nest, but when she was home, I could fly home today, and I'd walk in the door, she'd say, Mom, you got some green stuff in your teeth. You know, teenagers pull no punches. They'll just tell it like it is. You got some green stuff in your teeth. And I'm like, I was in Tulsa all day just grinning. Nobody told me I had any green stuff in my teeth. But, teenagers, they'll tell you. But I think we need more truth tellers, don't we? People who can tactfully tell us we got the spinach in the teeth, and you might, want to know that. And so certainly phrases 10 and 9 are giving the benefit of the doubt that perhaps the person was not aware of whatever the thing was, whether it be spinach in the teeth, ugly behavior, nonverbals, or just doing something totally disruptive in your department. So phrases 10 and 9 are good for that use. I do want to tell you my favorite phrase on the list, and then I will turn you loose to talk about some of the ones on the list that you resonate with. Actually, first I should point out the picture. I should talk about the picture. And this is a new picture that I've just added to my slide a couple months ago. This is a picture of me and my new husband. I actually just got remarried 3.5 years ago, coming up on 4 years in December. Got married on 12, 13, 14. So got remarried, was married for 12 years to the practice husband, and then there were 12 years in between, and then just got remarried almost 4 years ago. And the reason I chose, well, the thing that's interesting to me is someone pointed out in a previous presentation that I was telling way too many ex-husband stories. And what's up with that? You just got remarried and then your new husband has not made his appearance in any of your stories. And of course I said, well, you know, he's not been on the scene long enough. Give him a minute. He'll be in the negativity workshop tomorrow. But no, I had to have him do his debut, and he's made his debut on my top 10 phrases slide. And I thought that was a good picture to have on this slide, because home and relationships is much like work. You know, when a new team member comes to your department, or you have a new assignment and you're working with some new people, you've never worked with them before. So you don't know what pushes their buttons, what gets on your nerves, their nerves. You don't know what their issues are. You're just kind of figuring all that out, much like a new marriage. And so sometimes we find ourselves having to use the phrases to kind of get to the bottom of what is this person's deal? You know, what's going on here? You know, how do I work with them better? Because, you know, that's really the goal. I have to say, though, that for many years before my husband made his debut on this slide, the picture that I had on this slide was a picture of Columbo. How many of you remember Columbo? Peter Falk, wrinkled raincoat detective. He's my hero, because I used to remember, he's actually the hero for my phrase number 8, by the way, which is my favorite phrase, help me understand. Because you remember he would say, help me understand. I thought we agreed we were going to meet at the courthouse at noon. I'm confused. And it was always interesting because he was seeking input, but doing it in a way that was non-threatening. And I always feel like sometimes when we have a conflict situation, we might have to say, help me understand. You know, you're in a meeting and somebody's shooting your idea down. That's not going to work. We tried that before. That's not going to happen. Oh, that's a dumb idea. And you might have to say, help me understand what went wrong last time so we can avoid that. You know, help me understand what your concerns are. Now, I had been using this phrase as a nice, positive, wonderful phrase, and somebody recently told me that phrase number 8 is really code. I said, phrase number 8 is code? Code for what? And they said, phrase number 8 is code for WTF. I think I'm allowed to say that. Shannon, am I allowed to say that? I got the thumbs up from Kathy. Thank you. But you know, there are some days when you know, the evil twin, by the way, we all have the evil twin who lives over here and would say things to get us in trouble. And some days the evil twin, that's exactly what they're saying. And that's really what phrase number 8 is. Because you know, sometimes a decision has been made on high and you're wondering, you know, but you can't say that to them. But you could go to them and say, you know, help me understand the rationale behind the new policy. You know, help me understand the best way to implement this new policy in my department. You know, help me, you know, but the evil twin is screaming, you know what, from the sidelines. So phrase number 8 is my beloved phrase, but I'm going to give you a few moments now to continue your conversation with your best friend for now, and I want you to talk about actually a couple things, depending on how much time you have. Some of you are moving faster than others, but I'd like you to definitely talk about your favorite phrases that you can use with a straight face. Like, what phrases could you actually say at work? And then I'd like you, if you have time, to talk a bit about what phrases might you use at home. Because you know, I always, when I speak to groups, it's always in a business setting. But I always feel like I can slip in a little something that you can take home, whether it be to a new husband, a new wife, kids, in-laws, neighbors. But I find it's interesting because you know what they say about home, don't you? They say home is where we go when we're tired of being nice. You know, at work, we're like, let's collaborate. How can we work together better? And we go home, get upstairs right now. It's like, where's the top 10 phrases? Where's the love? All right, so I'm going to give you a few moments to chat about which phrases on this list you could use at work, which at home. And by the way, if you really have some extra time, maybe talk a little bit about, are there any of these phrases you could use for that situation that you've been chatting about? So I'll give you a few moments to chat about that. So my hope is that you will use the phrases for good and not for evil. I have had people use the phrases for evil. In fact, I was eavesdropping and overheard a few people in the room using the phrases for evil. We won't single anybody out. But I did have a man email me, and I'm going to be giving you my contact information shortly, but I did, and I encourage you to share with me how you've used the phrases, your successes, struggles, anything that you've encountered as you try to take this to the street and actually use it outside of this room. But I did have a man a couple weeks after I spoke for this group, this was a few years ago, he sent me an email, and I didn't recognize the name, of course, on the email, but the subject line said, "Distortion of Sarita's Top 10. I thought, ooh, this sounds juicy. I got to open this and see what this is all about. So I opened the email. He says, "Hello, Sarita. I just wanted to let you know that I'm already putting the top 10 phrases to good use at work. Here are some examples of how I'm using them." He took each of the 10 phrases, even my beloved number 8, took each of the phrases and used them in a sentence for evil. So, for example, he said he was going up to coworkers and he was saying, "Help me understand why they hired you." And then he goes on down to my other favorite, number 6. "I notice you're still here and I'm wondering when you're going to get out of my face." And he culminated with phrase number 1, "What will it take to get rid of you?" And guess what? I was pleased. Because, you know, as speakers, our worst fear is that you'll sit and you'll chat and you'll listen and you'll go away and do absolutely nothing differently. So I thought to myself, how much time must that have taken this man to go through each of the 10 phrases and use them, albeit for evil, but for each of these phrases. So of course I sent him a reply and I said, "Hello, thank you so much for all the time and effort you put into the phrases, into trying out the phrases. However, I'm concerned." dot, dot, dot. So I do hope that you'll use these phrases as a little guide, a cheat sheet, use them at work or even at home, because I think they can help you as you struggle with the difficult confrontations. You know, I do actually want you to be in touch, and I invite you to share whatever goes on with the phrases and everything else. And so I want to just mention that I have an email, sarita@saritamaybin.com, but I also want to point out that I do a monthly What Do You Say communique, where I send out some positive information on either communication, staying positive, whatever. And in fact, when you sign up for the list, you get 50 phrases. And those of you who are tech savvy can actually text Sarita Talk to 22828. And you immediately go on the list and you get the link automatically. And it's a PDF with 50 phrases for all occasions. But if you're old school like me, you can just go to my website, saritamaybin.com, and sign up there, and you'll get the automatic response with the link for the 50 phrases. And then every Monday, I post a quote on my Facebook Sarita Talk page, and of course tweet on Twitter. And so feel free to follow and like, and we can stay connected that way as well. I do know that some of you, even as we're speaking about all of these strategies, might find it interesting, because you know you're going to go back from the luncheon, right? You're going to go back to work and you're going to be like, da, 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 da. You know, you got some tools, you got some strategies, and then what's going to happen is you're going to walk in the door and the first person you see is going to say, "Help me understand." You're like, "Wait, what? I'm concerned. I would appreciate." And you're like, "They've been to the seminar." You know, what do you do when people use this stuff against you? Now, I will be talking later about how my daughter uses my own material against me. But for now, I just find that it's interesting because the question is, can you dish it and take it? And we can dish it out sometimes. We've been talking this whole first, 20, 30 minutes about dishing it out. But I would be remiss if I didn't spend some time while we're together to talk about, do we receive criticism gracefully without getting defensive, without getting ugly? And then we're going to talk a little bit about, what do you say when someone asks your opinion and you have nothing nice to say? And then we'll wrap up with my 3 Ps for staying positive. Sound good? All right, so we're going to go ahead and talk about another one of my favorite quotes, which is, speak in a way that people love listening to you, which is what we've been talking about for half an hour. But the other side of that is to listen in a way that people love speaking to you. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, today is a great day because you all are mostly positive, and I think most of you came voluntarily, right? Was anyone dragged, kicking? Did Shannon arm twist anybody to come? I don't know. By the way, let's give Shannon a round of applause before I forget to acknowledge her. I've been emailing her relentlessly. We've been emailing for months in preparation for my coming here. And you know, I love a good group like this because you're all here in a positive tone. You know, you're getting out of work for an hour or two, come learn some new. I love it. She's like, learn. I love it. She should be a plant in the audience. But you know, it's a positive experience. But you know, sometimes that's not the case. I'll go to companies where they invite me to come in-house, and there'll be 500 people in the room, and they've all been told, you're getting a little ugly lately. You need to go to the mandatory negativity workshop and get fixed. And I walk in the room, and there's 500 people with their arms folded like, bring it. What you got? And so that's a more difficult day. But this is a positive situation. But what I find, though, when I talk to those people who have been sent, when I talk to them one-on-one, they say, I'm not feeling like I'm heard. You know, I will share my opinions, but I know the boss is not going to hear what I have to say. I feel like I've been here for so many years and no one has asked what I think. No one has asked for my input. And so I feel like that second part of the phrase, listen in a way that people feel comfortable talking to us, that they love talking to us, is just as important. I mentioned that I grew up as a military brat, and strangely, I seem to keep being connected with the military. How I ended up in San Diego 28 years ago, the practice husband that I referenced earlier was at Camp Pendleton in the Marine Corps, and that's how I ended up in San Diego area. And interestingly, my new husband is retired Navy. So I seemed, and my two sisters and my brother, by the way, all went into the Army at one point. So I've been around a lot of military people my whole life, and they all say the same thing, that in the military there's this mantra. And the mantra basically is, if we'd wanted you to have an opinion, we would have issued you one with your boots and your helmet. And that's kind of harsh, right? That's harsh. But I go into in the corporate world, into companies where it feels like that. You know, where people are saying, you know, they'll tell me what my opinion is. And that's no fun at all. And so I think, how many of you are in supervisor roles? Hands up real high. How many of you are supervisors? Because I think especially in the supervisor role, and even people that we're not the boss of, when we're working with colleagues, are we also listening just as we are speaking in a way that's positive? So I really feel like it's a two-sided coin when we talk about communication. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't spend a little time talking about receiving criticism gracefully. You know, there's only one rule. It says rule number one and rule number two, but rule number one, when you get criticism, this is something one of my mentors told me when I was a grad student years ago. This was probably the best advice I've ever received. And she says, when you get criticism, ask for more. By the way, what is rule number two? Oh yeah, see rule number one. There's only one rule. And so when I was a grad student, my mentor told me this, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds nice, sounds good. Paid it no attention. Fast forward 5 years later, when I was a supervisor, I went to a seminar presentation much like this one, but it was for supervisors. And they said, you know what we suggest? We suggest you go back, and when you have your first one-on-one with that staff person, ask them, what do you think we should do to improve the department? Does that sound like a good idea? It sounded pretty good. I couldn't wait to get back and try it out. I got back, had my first one-on-one. I'm sitting there across this guy that I supervised, and I said, what do you think we can do to improve the department? Now, I'm going to tell you what he said. I still remember. It's haunted me all these years. I remember word for word exactly what he said. Now, my evil twin might embellish the nonverbals, but I said, what do you think we can do to improve the department? And he said, you can be a better supervisor. Now, maybe he didn't do all the pointing and the I call it the ugly body. Maybe he didn't have the ugly body, but he sure said those exact words. You could be a better supervisor. Warning, red alert, insubordinate, write him up. This is the evil twin shouting from the sidelines. And then I thought, wait a minute, I remember that advice. When you get criticism, ask for more. He says, you can be a better supervisor. And I said, how do you mean? I could have said, can you elaborate? Can you be more specific? Can you give me an example? All of those are ways of asking for more. And he said, well, some of us were talking. By the way, you ever notice that nothing good ever follows that statement? Some of us were talking, and we've decided that we don't know what you think about how we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Surely something goes wrong, you'll come and let us know. But we really don't know what you think on a day-to-day basis. I said, well, what do you suggest? He says, well, maybe when we have our one-on-one meetings, you could tell us one thing we're doing well, and then maybe one thing that we could work on. Okay. I tried it, and it was wonderful. But I didn't come up with that idea. And I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't that have been a different outcome if I had listened to the evil twin who said, warning, write him up, insubordinate. So I'm going to give you your last opportunity during our time together to chat with your best friend for now. And I'd like you to chat about a time that you got some negative feedback, heard something you didn't necessarily want to hear. And how did you respond? And hey, better yet, how might you have responded differently in asking for more? So a little confession time. I'll give you a moment for that with your last opportunity to chat during our time together. So you've been confessing. I won't ask for any public confession, though. But I'm sure we can all think of situations where we might have responded more positively when we got the ugly feedback, the negative comment. But what I think is rather interesting is there are times when we may have something ugly to say. And I want to spend our last 10 minutes or so talking about what do you do when someone asks your opinion and you have nothing nice to say. And then we'll wrap up with our 3 Ps for staying positive. Sound good? All right. By the way, that is a picture of me and my daughter when she was 2, and she's now 26. So that's a long time ago. And I sometimes post this picture on Facebook when it's her birthday, and she reminds me that this was the last time she'd ever be caught wearing a dress matching her mother. But really, there is another reason that she's on this slide, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment, about how she uses my stuff against me, which, because again, she's been sufficiently brainwashed after all these years of me being a professional speaker. And so I do want to talk about when someone says something to you, do you ever notice sometimes people will ask your opinion, but really they're just stirring the pot? You know, they'll say things like, what do you think of the new vice president? And you know anything you say can and will be used against you. And so the question is, how do you not get dragged down into the fray? And you know, that's the real goal. And I always feel like there's 3 options. The first one is just a non-response. A non-response would be when they ask you, what do you think of that new vice president? To say, you know what, I've been too busy to even think about it. So you don't even have to go there. And then, of course, the second thing is to say, you know, what do you think about him? You ever notice people who ask, what do you think about? They have an opinion. And so when you say, well, what do you think about him? They're going to go off and running, and you're off the hook. Sometimes I like to go boom, boom, and use 1 and 2. You know, I haven't even had time to think about him. What do you think about him? And use both of those. But my favorite is number 3, which is focus on the positive. You know, you may think of 9 negative things you could say about this person, but surely there's got to be 1 positive. And you might even say, you know what, I have to give it to him. He's really good with the customers. So we can focus on that positive. But better yet, think about a time when someone you know and respected, a friend, a colleague, asked for your honest input. You know, what do you think about that event we just did? Or how did you think the meeting went? And you can choose to say, you know, I really love the fact that everyone got a chance to get their input. You know, I really love the fact that people were involved and engaged. And you can choose to focus on that and say, but I would have liked a little bit more information about the project. So you could say I would like a little more of whatever the positive is, but we don't have to crush them and say it was awful, miserable. We don't have to be negative and harsh. Remember, say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. So that's kind of still the background, the refrain. I mentioned that my daughter has been using my material against me since she was a toddler. And I just remember, we were talking about teenagers earlier. I remember when she was about 15, we had a little push-pull Well, some of you can recognize that, relate to that. Little push-pull when she was 15. Didn't see things eye to eye. Very different opinion about things, tastes, choices, everything very, very different. And I remember asking her just a casual question, honey, what do you think of my new outfit? And she looked at me, total straight face. Mom, the important thing is, what do you think of the new outfit? I was like, oh, using my stuff against me. I hate that. But certainly we can use these to not get dragged into a negative situation because people are, there are people out there just stirring the pot, stirring the pot. By the way, I love the Maya Angelou quote. She says, you know what, if you don't like something, change it. But if you can't change it, change your attitude. Whatever you do, don't complain. And as we wind down, I like to share this quote because some of you are already thinking of people back at the office that you know you're going to use the top 10 phrases, you're going to use AIR, you're going to use all that stuff, and they're never going to change or do anything differently. I know some of you already know those people. So I want to go to my very last slide and give you some thoughts on staying positive even when things don't change, because we don't want to become the complainer person. We don't want to become that negative person. So how can we change our attitude if we don't get the results that we'd like? You'll notice that I mentioned on there, I'm going to give a shout out, in fact, to Dr. Martin Seligman, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He's kind of the guru of positive psychology, and I've been a fan of his for many years. He has studied the question I always want to know the answer to, which is, why do some people stay positive all the time, no matter what happens? You probably know people who've been through some really horrible things, but they still manage to stay positive. And then there's other people, some little thing could happen. They're the ones who I would say, look, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And they'd say, I see it, Sarita. It looks like an oncoming train to me. They're the ones who are always going to find the dark side. And I always wondered, what is the make or break? Why are some people positive and why are others always going to the dark side? And so I've taken from Dr. Martin Seligman's work the 3 Ps. And this is a make or break. The first P is, are you taking things personally? You probably know people who say, I know they just changed the company policy to make my life miserable. Like, seriously? I don't think you were on the agenda when they changed the policy. But some people think everything's about well, why does this stuff always happen to me? So we've heard that. We know people who will take everything personally. And then secondly, permanent. Complete this phrase, one of my mother's other favorites. This too shall pass. And Dr. Martin Seligman would say, if we're able to see that whatever this thing is in now, we hate it, to say, you know what? A year from now, we're going to look back and say we got through it. Sometimes we might even say, I'm going to look back and laugh. Now, my daughter, again, I have to bring her in. By the way, my daughter, when she comes to hear me speak every now and then, she goes, Mom, I don't even recognize myself. And I always say, you know what, I have maybe embellished a little bit, but not much. But I just remember when she was younger, she'd travel with me to some of the seminars when she was out of school or it was summer. Sometimes we'd check into a hotel, certainly not this one, but sometimes we'd check into a hotel. There might be a snippy, rude person at the desk. And my daughter in her 8-year-old wisdom would say, Mommy, is this going to be a good story for your negativity workshop? She said she's going to get me a t-shirt that says, life is a seminar story. So for me, I'm like, this too will pass, and it's going to be a good story. Once I get over it, it's going to be a great story. And then last but not least, big picture. Are we letting it taint our big picture? You can probably again, name names of people who say things like, way back in 2005, things changed. Never been the same since. It's never going to get better. So let's review the 3 Ps just to make sure you're with me. The first P, am I taking it what? Personally. Second P, is the situation permanent? Does it matter in the big picture? Personal, permanent, picture. You know what the number one question is people ask me? They say, Sarita, I'm positive, but I work with whiners. How do I keep that from rubbing off on me? And I say, personal, permanent, picture. And the best example I've heard is a woman who says, my boss is a jerk. Jerk wasn't the word she used, I'm cleaning it up. But she says, my boss is a jerk, but I console myself by saying, it could be worse. I could be married to him. But guess what? She wasn't the one I gave the point to. The one I gave the point to was the woman sitting right next to her says, I am married to someone just like him. But I console myself by saying, it could be worse. I could be him. She got the point. You know, one last story before I close. I was speaking at one of those places where they had been sent, so they weren't too happy. I remember walking in the door, and there was a man standing in the doorway as I walked in. He looked me up and down, and he says, "You remind me of my ex-wife." And I said, "Oh, I guess today's going to be a long day for you then, isn't it?" So as we leave, I want to tell you that they say there are two types of people, those who brighten the room when they walk in and those who brighten the room when they leave. I invite you to decide which one of those you're going to be. Have a great day.